Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and in today's video, the year is 2012. This is the Skystars QAC250 and yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. This is a ZMR 250 frame with a quadrocopter flight controller. This is a GPS unit with a built-in compass and we have got a full-size Minim OSD. So you might be thinking, Andy, what on earth are you playing at? Well, if you are not a regular subscriber to the channel, then you won't know that my favourite freestyle bind and fly copter is the Skystars Starlord. And when I saw this guy come up, I just thought it was so crazy, I just have to take a look at it. And when mini quads first came out, there was definitely a hype. I think a lot of people saw YouTube videos and piled a lot of money into mini quads, but they ran into troubles. I have seen far too many people just sell up because they just had a bad crash. So what I think this hobby needs, and I've said it before, is a model that can do it all. So it can start off like a DJI model where it loiters and it has returned to home and you can slowly learn how to fly it. But at the same time, you can have full ACRO mode, and if you get into a panic, you can flick a switch and the thing will stabilize itself, it will hover on the spot, and you can even have it return to home. So, is this that model? Well, unfortunately, not quite. All they have done is just built it, so there's no setup whatsoever. But just recently there's been quite a bit of activity regarding quadrocopter and quadrupilot because they have switched operating systems. So they're now using something called Chibios, which means that you are not tied down to using the Pixhawk or APM hardware. For example, the QAC250 flight controller that you would usually run Betaflight on can also have quadrocopter installed on it, along with many other flight controllers. Although I think iNav is probably the way to go if we want this sort of all-in-one solution, maybe. But again, iNav, when it comes to the ACRO, isn't on par with Betaflight, and I think that is going to be the case even more so with the quadrocopter. And I don't even know if I'm going to be able to get this thing to fly, so I should talk about the specifications and see if I can. So the motors are an old school 2205 2300 kV Skystars branded motor. Next we've got the ESCs, which are individual, and they are 30 amp, but they are BL Halley 32. So yeah, quadrocopter is supporting BL Halley 32, and it supports D-Shot, although I think they recommend D-Shot 150. You can go higher, but that's what they recommend, and it does BL Halley pass-through. So they are making these small changes. In fact, I've even heard rumours about them implementing smart audio, and they're being release candidates with smart audio. So it's exciting stuff. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the Minim OSD, which unfortunately is just a stock Minim OSD, so no settings have been changed. It's running ArduCam version 2.0, which really is from 2012. So it's got this connector on here. I'm going to have to pull that out and insert this FTDI adapter, and then use ArduCam to change my settings that I want. It has come with a XM Plus receiver. It does not have the RSSI firmware flashed to it. So the stack consists of a power distribution board, so all of the ESCs are soldered into that, and it's got a built-in BEC, and then we've got a JST connector, and that is powering everything. And it's actually branded YRRC, and I think all of this is actually made by YRRC, because they have a flight controller that looks identical to this, and also a GPS and compass that looks identical to this. In fact, I was sent it, so I think Skystars has just put their name over it. So yeah, I'll show you a picture of the YRRC flight controller, but this one just says Skystars across it, but it still says the Mini Pix 4. So yeah, it's an F4 flight controller, and everything is plug and play. So we've got the USB port there where we would configure everything through Mission Planner, and then this is where the on-screen display is connected. Then we have got the GPS, which is connected in there, and we've also got the compass. So it's got a built-in compass in here, but there's also a built-in compass here as well. And then if we come round here, what have we got? So this is where S-Bus is plugged into, and then we've got a beeper here. This is where the PWM is going in, so they are actually on servo pins, but they are using D-shot. Then we've got the VTX at the back, which switches from 25 milliwatt to 200 milliwatt all the way up to 600 milliwatt. It is 40 channel, and of course it doesn't have smart audio, but it does have a really nice display, and we've got an accessible button there, so it's very easy to know what channel that you are on. It's also using a MMCX pigtail, and that comes around here to a SMA antenna, which is housed in this Dayglow orange TPU mount. What is strange is this small antenna. It's unbranded, but it's right hand polarized and it is SMA, but I'm going to probably be putting a longer antenna on there because this is going to be a top mounted battery, so that is just going to block your video signal if you use the stock antenna. One thing I am concerned about is how the XT60 is mounted to this power distribution board. It is really flimsy, it's just a couple of mil thick, and with my fingers I can just bend it, so it's not even going to take a hard crash for that to break. And the XT60 connector is a really poor quality one, so I think I'll be desoldering this and then adding a wire. I think the way that they have mounted the flight controller might be an indication of what the ACRO flight is going to be like compared to how we soft mount Betaflight flight controllers, because it's just on a couple of bits of foam there. But hey, it worked in the Pixhawk days, so maybe it will work for this Pix Mini. One thing that I should say though is that this is a fork of some kind of Arducopter, because when I try to update the board using the official mission planner, it says board not recognized. And I'm trying to find some information of where to get the firmware. So this has got Arducopter version 3.67 and the latest is 3.69. So it'd be nice to have the latest and greatest, and of course as they advance with this system, which it seems like they are doing all of a sudden, then it'd be nice to know if we're gonna get the updates with this custom firmware, or fork should I say. But I've searched everywhere. I've searched for YRRC flight controller firmware and I can't find it anywhere. The only thing that I can find is RadioLink make a very similar flight controller to this one, but I tried that firmware and it wouldn't upload. And also Holybro have got their own version of the Pixhawk or Pix Mini or whatever you want to call it, and that also doesn't work. So it's some bespoke firmware that they've come up with, and if I have any more information on it then I will link it in the description of the video. The The model comes as a bind and fly, as I mentioned, with the XM Plus, with the international version of the firmware. It did come with these cable ties and heat shrink already around the arms, which I like. You can also get it as a plug and fly, so you can put whatever receiver you like on it. Hey, you could even put Crossfire on it, I guess, if you are using it just for S-Bus. And they do an R9 version of it as well. And then lastly, up the front, we have got the camera, which looks like a generic CMOS camera. I think it's 16:9. It says it's a 2.1mm lens. I'm not expecting amazing results out of it, and it's mounted on this TPU mount here. So in the box you get the usual Skystars stickers, but we get some props as well. I think they are unbranded, but they are a 50/42, and you get 2 sets of those in pink. We have got 2 straps here, and they are Skystars branded. I always like the Skystars straps. They are the grippy kind. We have got some prop nuts, which look to be directional. And this takes a 3 to 4S. I'm going to be using a 1550 4S for this one. You're also given a silicone mat to stop your battery from getting thrown, which I always appreciate. So we've got an adhesive on the back there, and you'd stick that on the top. And we've also been given the straws for the antennas of the R9 system and the tip, so I guess that is something that they just put in every package. So with the props, the battery strap and the nuts and also the silicone mat, its weight is 415 grams, so fairly heavy, but I would say that this was a freestyle copter, and especially, you know, when you've got GPS and things like that. And then with the 1550 milliamp 4S LiPo, it's around about 586 grams. I think one of the limiting things with Arducopter that makes it more of a passion project than a all-in-one solution for beginners is how limited it is in terms of number of channels. Everything is basically done through just one channel when it comes to changing from stability mode to loiter mode to return to home mode, ACRO, and all of the features in there. And we just have 3 other channels, and again we're limited to what we can put on those channels. Now there are a lot of videos out there showing how to set up switches to manipulate the transmitter so that you can use more channels, but I saw that and just thought, oh, forget that, and I'll install a 6-position switch. And what this does is it basically just goes through different PWM values on that one channel that selects the option. The problem is the PWM values do not match up to Arducopter, so you have to put a curve in there. Now with this guy I had to add it, and you also had to change some settings in there, but with the Horus it's actually already set up. So if I go into system, page over, there we go, you can see 6-position switch, and that is on here. So it's already set up, but if I press return and go into my model, what you'll see in my inputs is a 6-position switch, but I've had to put it on an input rather than going straight to the mixer, and that's because you have to create a curve. So if I page over to the curves, and these are the values that you put in, and it's thanks to Painless 360 for these values. So it's these bottom ones here, and it's the same on the Tyrannus, and what that does then is it matches up the PWM value of the 6th position switch to what Arducopter has got in there for its different modes, and it's exactly the same with the X9D. And you can see I have to change the curve to custom and then CV1, and then that applies the curve. And then if I page over to the mixer and go down to channel 5, then you can see I've got it as my modes, and that 6th position switch goes through pretty much all of the modes, apart from, if I just return, so on channel 7 we have got the option to ARM. So I've set it up to ARM because I want to emulate a mini quad as much as possible with having the GPS functions. So I've also added sounds to it as well, because that's where it starts to get difficult with GPS, is knowing what mode that you're in, especially if you've got goggles on, although I will be setting up the on-screen display to tell me what mode I'm in as well. But if I select that switch,
ARM motors,
see, it says that it arms. So yeah, it has an ARM feature, and when you are in stability mode or angle mode, if you are familiar with Betaflight, and you get a fail-safe, then the motors will switch off and it'll just drop out the sky. The same in ACRO mode, but if it's in GPS mode and you get a fail-safe, it'll return to home. So to get it to play those sounds, if I page over to the special functions screen, it's a little bit different on the Horus, but there are plenty of videos out there showing you how to do this. I would recommend Painless 360 for the X9D. So that's the 6th position, and you can see in each position I've got it to play a different track. So if I move it along one,
altitude hold, stabilize.
So the first one is stabilize, and then
altitude hold,
loiter,
return to launch, ACRO, landing.
So that's all of them there, and of course that has to match up with what you do in Mission Planner. So you just go along here, and this is a sound pack. It's the Amber sound pack, but it's been modified for OpenTX 2.2 and above, so make sure that you get that version if you're wanting to do that. But as you can see, a little bit of a pain to set up. Next, it's time to sort out the on-screen display. So I've got my FTDI adapter, and I'm actually going to be using some servo pins rather than directly connecting it up. So make sure that it's set to 5 volts. The reason I'm using servo pins is that I didn't want to cut back the heat shrink on the Minim OSD hardware device because it could short with the carbon, and I didn't want it to do that, but you could cut that back and connect it direct. It's really important that you make sure the DTR is connected as well. But I'm just removing the connector there, and it is literally a like-for-like connection up to the computer. Yeah, if you don't connect the DTR, then you might get a bootloader error, but this is the website where you download the configurator from 2012, and that's the firmware if you run into any issues, but I didn't. So I'm going to open up the program now, and we need to select the COM port, so it's plugged into the computer, and read from the on-screen display, and it will say done downloading data. So then I will show you my settings. So I've set all of the RSSI values to 0 because I don't want any warnings popping up because I don't have RSSI. Then I have got the on-screen display toggle channel disabled because I only want one screen. I've got the brightness set to low, that seems to work fine. You need to put a call sign in even though I didn't use it, and I set these values really high, otherwise you'll get warnings again, and I changed it to Imperial. Then the minimum battery voltage 13.9 because I'm going to be using a 4S, and the percentage level 0 because I don't want any warnings either. Then these are the settings. I wanted it as simple as possible, so we have got the battery voltage there and the visible number of satellites and whether we've got GPS lock. Then we've got the Mavlink heartbeat and the home direction. And we've got the altitude there in meters and the home altitude. And if we come down here, we've got current as well. So then we have got velocity and airspeed, and then also the flight mode, which I think is really important. And I've got the warnings on there as well, because it's important with GPS to have. And I've got the time, and I've got the RSSI turned off because it's not set up. And then efficiency was a weird one because I didn't want it, but every time I went to remove it and then save it, it came back up. I also wanted the distance to home, but that would just disappear. I guess I need to update to a newer version of the on-screen display. But anyways, when you save that, you can move on to the second tab, and I removed everything from there because I don't want a second tab, just the one for me, and then exit out of that and we can unplug everything. So I don't want to waste too much of your time showing all of these settings in Arducopter and Mission Planner, because that would be a video series on its own, and there are already a load of video series out there if you want to delve deep into this system. However, I found a really quick way to get this model flying nicely. So I'm going to plug the quadcopter into the computer and it should make a noise from the flight controller. There we go. One thing that is good about the way they have built this is that it will power up the receiver when you plug in the USB and also the Minim OSD, so you can bind your model without having to plug the battery in, and it doesn't power up the VTX either, so you don't have to worry about that burning out. So if you want to find Mission Planner, then just go into Google and type Mission Planner. It will take you to the ArduPilot and you can download it. And this is it. And you can see that I've got COM port 33 up there, and it requires the virtual COM port drivers that Betaflight use. So if you already have Betaflight, then it should just work, but you may need to download the VCP drivers, that's virtual COM port drivers. And if I press connect, then it should connect to the official version of ArduPilot, the same as any other flight controller that supports it. However, you will see here that it's actually got Arducopter on it, and it's version 3.67. Now, I actually didn't use this version of Mission Planner, so if I press disconnect here, Radiolink actually have their own flight controller, and it has got presets for a 210 size mini quad. So I just went on the Radiolink website and on the product page for this flight controller, and it's got a manual and it shows you all of the settings. But not only that, their own version of Mission Planner actually has got presets in it. So that's the first thing that I did. So these are all of the settings here. So they do give you all of the settings and how to go in and change them, but you can see here that they have got a setup that will just put all of the parameters on there that you need for your PIDs, etc. So that's what I did first of all. So if I come down here and go in there, you'll see that ArduPilot has disappeared, but I can connect to it, and it may take some time again. So we'll just wait for that to connect. Then if I go into configuration and then go into the full parameter list, what we have got down the side here are some parameters, and I just chose the top one, and then I pressed write params, and then that gives you all of the PIDs that they are detailing in here, because you can't actually type them into this screen. So if I go into that actual screen, which I think is extended tuning, it won't let you put this information in there. So for whatever reason, you have to go into the full parameter list, but with me I just used their preset. So I did change some other things after that. So on channel 7 I've got arm and disarm, and I might actually set up channel 8 to have a loss model alarm. I was going to have auto tune on here because I wasn't sure if it was going to fly nice, but I don't think this copter is going to fly any nicer than it does. So you can see that we've got the auto tune option, but we've also got lost copter sound, and I think that would be very useful. So I would have to set that up on my transmitter, but that's something that I'm going to do, and I can press write parameters there, and I'm just going to press yes, and then I can have a lost copter sound if for whatever reason you crash, but you shouldn't do with this system. That's the idea of it, it's redundancy. So a problem with the Radio Link Mission Planner is that some of the options are in Chinese. So once I had loaded the preset, I then disconnected from the Radio Link version and then went back to the official version, and it saves all of those settings, so all of the parameters are the same, but then we can go into the mandatory setup and set all of our modes up and things like that. So if we go to initial setup, so we've got mandatory hardware, so frame type, it was already set as quadcopter. And then if we go into the accelerometer calibration, I like to use this one, and it's really easy and it's more accurate. So what it will do is you'll press calibrate accelerometer, and you'll have to find a level surface for it being level, but it will then guide you to turn the copter on its side and then turn it upside down, and then the other side on its nose and on its back, and it's really accurate. I like that. Then onto compass. This one is pretty important because we have got two compasses on this model and they seem to work very well, so this is how I've got it set up. So I've got enable compasses, and primary compass is compass 1, and I've got obtain declination automatically ticked, but I've got automatically learn offsets as turned off. And then for compass 1, I've got use this compass, and this one is externally mounted, so this is the one that is at the front. And then compass 2, use this compass, but of course it's internal. Then what you need to do is you need to press start, and there is kind of like a way to do it. It's a bit like the DJI dance, and if you search on YouTube how to calibrate the compass of Arducopter or ArduPilot, then it'll show you how to do it. But once that is finished, it is really accurate. Then for the radio calibration, I'm going to turn on my Tyrannus.
Welcome to OpenTX. Stabilize.
So you can hear a little beep there, and we can calibrate the radio. You can see you can also bind here as well, so if you are using Spectrum, then we've got some options down here, but we will calibrate the radio. What I had to do though is the mapping was incorrect, so I had to change that. But if I move my throttle and all of my values, then you can see everything is working fine. I had to go into the configuration tab and then the full parameter list. And then if we go into RC map and then enter, and that should bring up the mapping. So this is a FR Sky transmitter, and the channel map is TAER, so that's throttle, aileron, elevator and rudder, and these were different values, and that's all that we need to do is change these values so that they are in that order. So it's T first, so throttle, so change that value to 1, and then it is A, which is aileron or roll, so change this one to 2, and then it is pitch, so that will be E, so 3, and 4 for the yaw. So once you have changed those numbers, you want to make sure that you write the parameters, and then we can go back to the initial setup. And everything is working here. So yeah, you want to do that channel mapping before calibrating the radio. So the next thing I want to touch on is the ESC calibration, because it might confuse you. These are D-Shot 1200 capable 32-bit ESCs, and as you can see under ESC type it is blank, and when we click the option we just have a normal one shot 125 and brushed. But it has come set up with D-Shot 150, and the way that you get those settings is if we go into the parameter list and type in MOT_PWM_type, we have got this here, and value 4 is D-Shot 150, and it's recommended to use D-Shot 150, so I didn't bother messing with any of the others. But then 5 is 300, and 6 is 600, and 7 is D-Shot 1200 if you are interested. But you don't really need to change anything there because this came set up like that. I thought I would just explain it. So flight modes, this is how I have got it set up, and if you followed earlier regarding changing the throttle curve, then these are all of my different settings. So in position 1, with my transmitter turned on, you can see it's highlighted green, and if I change it,
Altitude hold.
so it moves to altitude hold, move it back, stabilize, so
Altitude hold.
we can go through all of those.
Return to launch. ACRO. Landing.
So you can see
Stabilize.
all of those are matching up. So the last thing that you're going to want to do is set the fail-safe. This is pretty straightforward with FR Sky if you are used to Betaflight. So we can see our throttle value there, and that's the throttle right at the bottom, 982. So what I have done is I've set the fail-safe here to 937, so that's the PWM value. Now with FR Sky, when you turn off the transmitter, it drops way below that. I think maybe even into the 800s, but as long as this figure is lower than the figure here, then your fail-safe should work. You need to test it, of course. So I have got it on return to land, and you might think, well, what if you are in ACRO mode? Well, if you're in ACRO mode, I mentioned this earlier, it will just shut off the motors. Same in stability mode, it will only return to home if it's in one of the GPS modes. And I have also got the battery setting disabled. So I've got GCS FS enabled as well, and that is all of the settings. Okay, so I've done my cold start, but it didn't take very long. It was definitely under a minute. So I've got it in stability mode. Let's see if this thing actually flies. So I'm arming the motors. You can hear a beep go there, and I'm going to go up on the throttle, and it flies. Everything seems to be working in stability mode, at least. Yeah, let's do a punch test. I definitely did see some movement there, but I'm not hearing oscillations or anything like that. which is cool. As I say, I'm not expecting a Betaflight like response and tune, although I have to say, line of sight, it's responding nicely. I'm not noticing any latency. When it comes down on the throttle a little bit, I'm noticing that it's more floaty. So if I come down on the throttle, yeah, and it just needs a little bit of a punch to recover. I guess that's with it being a little bit heavier. Okay, so I picked the best day here. Not, it's really windy. So let's go into the next mode, which is altitude hold. So that's where the throttle stick is in the middle, and it holds its own altitude much like a DJI model would, but I still have to control the model. Seems to be working. So I'm gonna do hands off the throttle. It will drift a little bit because it's using the barometer, but hopefully you can see me just go up on the throttle a little bit, because of course you can go up. So it does look like it is limiting the throttle so that you can't do fast movements. So if I just show the transmitter, no fast movements, but throttle in the middle, and it's holding its position. So next, the big one. What about loiter mode? So that's altitude hold and GPS hold, and it's doing it. It's actually doing it. That's brilliant. And can I still push it around? Bring it down on the throttle, so we've still got altitude hold. But it's loitering, as you can see. Oh man, it's really getting blown around by that wind, but so am I. You see it jumping up and down there. That wouldn't look great on a HD cam. But look at that, it is compensating. Alright, well, let's take it away a little bit and see what happens when I do return to home. I'm not going to take it too far so that we can still see it with the camera. Actually, it might be better to take it over this way a little bit, and then I'm just going to move it into return to home. So it says return to launch. It's lifted up to some height. Looks like around about, I don't know, maybe 30 meters. Now of course it does not have any sensors or anything like that, so I'm not expecting it to find the landing pad, but the goal here is to land back home, and it's doing just that. So there is the landing pad, and I don't want it to completely land, so I've put it back into altitude hold mode, and that's actually really super. So yeah, that's loitering. So finally, do I dare do it? What if we just go into ACRO mode? So I'm gonna turn the dial and see what happens. There we go, we're in ACRO mode. Everything feels fine. Look at that. Does that mean I can do rolls and things then? Just like a normal mini quad. Yeah, and it doesn't seem too bad. It seems pretty locked actually. So these are the PID settings that I took from the Radio Link flight controller. And it's behaving nicely, line of sight. What about a power loop? Yeah, no problems. Well, I'm absolutely speechless. I didn't think it would do it. Now the setup is a pain, I'll give it that, but there's plenty of information out there on how to get it set up. But I would say watch this space as well, because I know there's an iNav version coming. It's going to be a 7-inch. They are putting iNav and GPS on that. So what happens if I just turn the dial? Loiter, so I'm back into loiter. Just gonna bring it lower down, and then let's have it do a return to launch. What happens if you have it quite low? So is it the next one? So it is going to still gain its height. It's compensating for the wind. If you're wondering how I knew how many satellites it had, then it's because I've got my goggles around my neck. So it's coming down very slowly for a return to launch. It works. So I'm going to put it into loiter mode and let's bring it in for a landing, and then see what it's like FPV. Look at that, motor's disarmed straight away as well. Takes a few seconds for it to arm, so if I put into stabilize mode, you can see that's how long it takes. But it's very quick to disarm. So let's take a look at an FPV flight. We are 3 minutes 30 in, and that's not because I was waiting for a GPS lock. I was waiting for the dog walkers to disappear. So I'm in loiter mode at the moment, and just as I suspected, the camera isn't that great. It would have been much better if it didn't have a huge speck of dust on the sensor. So you can see that there at the top right, so some quality control issues there. And you can see that it's saying stall as well, so even though I set the parameters in the ArduCam to an impossible number, it's still saying stall. So I wanted to use the stock software that it came with, but really it needs updating. So I'm going to switch the modes now. So we're in loiter mode, but if we check, it's going to go to return to launch, but then ACRO. So we are now in ACRO mode. And you know what? It wasn't bad at all. It's still saying stall, of course. So I would say that it was very early clean flight, but it was definitely usable. Another thing that the on-screen display is doing as well is you can see that it's reporting its height above sea level, so like 645 feet. And again, that is the on-screen display just interpreting what it is receiving from the MavLink. So if I upgraded the minim on-screen display to a newer software, then that would sort out quite a lot of problems, I think. But you can see the home direction there, and I'm just playing around with the settings because I'm trying to change it back into return to home, but then also loiter, and it does that pretty seamlessly. So we're in loiter mode there, and you can see that it is compensating with the GPS. We are on an angle. The only problem is because it was a windy day, the camera has to be fairly straightforward, and with it compensating, it's pitching backwards, so I actually turn towards where the wind is pushing the copter forward slightly so that I can get a nice view. And I'm just going to try and switch settings again. So we're in loiter mode, goes into return to home mode. That's just the options I've got it in, and then we're back into ACRO mode. Now, one thing I would suggest if you are interested in this package at all is I would have everything on a switch rather than the 6-position pot. Now, I'm fairly proficient, so I can fly and mess around with the pot at the same time. But if you are fairly new to all of this and you want a panic switch, then it's going to be too late by the time you've found that 6-position switch. So I would really investigate how to use the switches so that you can have your finger ready if you want to go from ACRO all of a sudden into loiter just on a switch. But other than that, I was fairly impressed. The flight time was great. It was nearly a 6-minute flight time, and there was plenty of juice left. And you have to remember, because this is a ZMR 250 frame, you could put 6-inch blades on there and get an even longer flight time. So yeah, pretty impressed with that. But what we're about to see now is a problem. So I'm going to do a punch out, and look what's happened. The on-screen display has reset, and that is because these Minim OSD boards are very sensitive to changes in voltage. They need a constant voltage supply, and you'll notice that the on-screen display has reset, but it's completely locked. Now, if this was a different firmware on there, I've seen it before, it would reset, but it would then resume all of the feedback that it was getting, and you would get the figures. But here we don't have it, so you can see it's just stuck. The timer's stuck at 11 seconds, but I've gone back into loiter mode there. That's the good thing, I guess, about the on-screen display, is that it's passive, so that it's not affecting what's going on with the copter. So all of the audio that I'm hearing from my transmitter is telling me what mode it's in, but I'm not actually getting the voltage from the copter. However, I have to say, when I landed at just below 6 minutes, the voltage was 15 volts, so it was pretty bang on, and I think I could have gone for a lot longer. I've put it into return to launch mode there, but it wasn't quite lining up with my landing pad, so I then switched it into loiter mode because I wanted to land on the landing pad so that I didn't get grass everywhere. But there you go, that is my review of the Skystars QAC250. I'll put a link in the below if you wish to get one, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.